So please join me in welcoming Bob Miller.
Thank you very much, Jim. I appreciate very much the invitation to be here with you today. I think it's on. The green light's on. Test, test, test. There we go. So it's great to be with you today. I hope that I can pose some questions for you before the end of this session today that will get you thinking in a different way than you may have been thinking in the past. That will provoke you to think about what is the next 10 years and what can I do as a leader in my organization, because you're here, you are leaders. You're out on the front. You're trying to learn and you're trying to take ideas back to affect other people. So I hope that I'll be able to pose some inspiring questions and some maybe even some conundrums for you to think about. So how does this really work? And how do I really accomplish what I want to accomplish? So I did have the privilege of working at the Shingo Institute for 8 years. And during that time, we did a lot of thinking about how do you really sustain this culture? Because what I discovered, and I think there's some representatives from AME and others, SME and others here, when I first started at the Shingo Institute, they said to me, Bob, we used to, AME in particular, they say, we used to just look at the list of Shingo recipients, and that's where we went and did our conferences, and we had study trips and went to those locations. But we found that we can't do that anymore because they're unpredictable. Sometimes we'll get a great one, sometimes we won't, and this was quite alarming because outside of the lobby, in the lobby of all of these companies was the Shingo brand. Our trophy was there. And yet when you walked inside the door, there was a huge variation in what you might see. So I, as the new leader of the organization, this was quite alarming. So we went to visit those companies and said, so what is it that we're not getting right here? Did they not deserve the prize? Or did something happen after we reviewed them that changed? And of course, we found a lot of truth in both of those situations. We weren't looking for the right things, and the companies were in fact changing. We often saw them on their very best day. So what I want to share with you is some of the insight that we've gained over the last 8 years in response to that reality that we discovered. How do you really create sustainability in an organization? What do you do to make sure that when you make a gain or an improvement, that it becomes embedded not only in practice but also in belief and in culture? So it becomes the new practice becomes the way you think. And not just you, but everybody in the organization. So I'm going to share some of that insight with you. Before I do that, also as Jim mentioned, I did retire from the university here just a couple of months ago. And I've tried to make a practice over many years to leave my work at work. And when I come home, to be able to focus on my 5 children and the last few years, my now 15 grandchildren. And but now that I've retired and my office is my home, I can't leave my work at the office. It's right there around me every day. So my office is right in the front of our house. And a young man came up to the door, and I thought, oh, he's going to ring the doorbell. I'm going to have to disrupt. That was really an important part of some work I was doing. And I know that he saw me sitting at my desk. So I knew I couldn't just ignore it. I had to answer the door when it rang. So the doorbell rang. I went to the door, and I met this delightful young man. He must have been maybe 24 or 25 years old. And he was selling, he had this little tag around him and make it official. He was selling Christmas decorations. And he wanted to install the Christmas lights on my house. He must have heard that I was getting old and I didn't want to climb up on the roof anymore. And somehow he figured that I was a target. So we got talking, and I asked him about himself. Turns out that he has an MBA with an undergraduate degree in finance and economics. And he's selling Christmas decorations. So I thought, well, I need to get to know this guy better. So we talked and talked, and he told me, he said, so what do you do? When I thought I knew him pretty well. And I told him what I did, and he said, oh, I know all about that. I studied that in school. I studied all about lean. I said, really? What did you learn? He said, well, in my company, and it turns out he owns the company, and he has about 6 trucks all over northern Utah selling Christmas decorations and landscaping. And he said, unfortunately, I don't work in operations, so I've had to try and apply the principles of lean into my own life. I said, really, how did you do that? And so he started talking about his relationships with his staff and how he works with the people in his organization. And he started talking about his wife and his children and his community responsibilities. And he was applying the principles of lean that he studied in his accounting from Rosemary Fullerton, who many of you know Rosemary. And he said, I've tried to apply them in my life. He said, I've got to figure out how to apply them at work. And I said, you know what? You're doing something that most of us are still trying to figure out how to do. You're putting them into your personal life. So what I want to share with you is that very message, that in order for us to really become for our organizations to become what we want them to become, it requires each one of us, everybody in this room, to apply these things personally in our own lives. We can't be something different in the work environment than we are in our personal environment. We have to think and believe deeply in the principles that we're trying to embed into our professions. And in order to believe them, they have to become who we are. So, just a real quick review. For those of you who have been around, and there are some of you who have been around a while. I recognize some of your faces. I went to some of the very first AME conferences. In the 60s, we talked about quality circles. And I know that they existed earlier than that, but we started talking and socializing quality circles in the 60s. In the 70s, I worked at John Deere at that time, and we started talking about a program we called Work Simplification. But Work Simp was nothing more, because we had courses that tried to teach the Work Simp teams how to do it, and they were quality circles trying to use some systematic approach to take cost out. And then we used a technique we called Kepner-Trago and K&T. Anybody remember or use K&T in their work practices? Some of you have. So K&T has been around for a long time. It was a set of tools to help us make improvements. In the 80s, we started talking about a lot of the same kind of things, but we called them just in time. And then we called them SPC, and we saw some pictures of some of the leaders that helped us to think about that. So here's a new set of tools applied in almost the same situations as the 60s and 70s that I experienced. And then in the 90s, we started calling the same things total quality management. When you go to Japan, in Japan, they still talk about these same old terms. The first time I went there on a study trip, I was shocked. And I thought, these guys are really behind. They're talking about stuff we did 30 years ago. But when you actually talk to them, you discover that they're talking about the same things that we're talking about now, only they've been doing them for 30, 40 years. So in the year 2000, I had a picture of a lean. I had a different picture here, and my wife made me take it out. That's the other part about working at home. I have an editor. So we changed the language, adapted the tools slightly, and now we talk about Six Sigma and lean. And then nowadays, we talk about Lean Sigma and Lean Six Sigma. And we're now starting to talk about culture, which is a great thing. So, what's the value of this little exercise, as this trek through the past? It helps us to realize that as we've gone through the last 40 or 50 years of thought leadership, what we keep doing is reinventing a lot of the same kinds of practices over and over again. We put new names on them. We focus them a little bit different in the organization, but what they really represent are a few key principles that present themselves over and over again to us in slightly different variations. But the principles are the red thread that have run through all of these generations of improvement that I've experienced. And so, principles, as Dr. Covey would teach us, are universal, meaning they apply in every part of every organization. They apply in accounting, they apply in HR, they apply in finance, they apply in product development, and in operations. But they are universal and they are timeless, meaning they applied in the 60s, in the 50s, in the 40s, in the 1840s, in the 1640s, because they are principles, they're natural laws that govern consequences. And that's what a principle is. The reason these things keep reincarnating themselves in new programs is because they are the natural laws that govern the consequences that we get in our business. That's why they keep showing up. They won't stop coming back. If you don't get it implemented now, they'll reincarnate themselves in some new form in the future. Because wise people, when you stop and think, what is it that governs our ability to deliver great results? And when you think about that, what you end up with are these few principles. So the evidence is clear as we look back over the history of what we've done is that it's not enough for us to just implement a bunch of tools. It's not enough for us to create a great program. You can't go hire a great director of continuous improvement and expect that your culture will change or you're going to make it stick. It takes more than programs. It takes more than tools. It takes more than systems. They're necessary. Of course they're necessary, but they're insufficient. So now we're talking about, remember, we're talking about these fundamental natural laws that govern the outcomes of our businesses. In order to affect them, we have to talk about culture. Sustainability is making sure that we're tapped in, not to the programs or the tools, but we're tapped into these principles, and that's where we get the culture from. Until you get it to culture, you will not be able to sustain it. I guarantee it. When you look in your organizations, if it's not embedded in the mindset and the thinking and the natural way in which results happen, you're not there yet. I remember I worked for a great company in Denver for quite a few years, and we developed the GBLP. It was the business leadership process for this company. And I was so confident that we had done it right, that an opportunity came for me to be promoted, and I thought, okay, is it deep enough? Will it last? And I felt like it was, because we had a great system. So I moved on, and then came back to that area a few years later, and it had gone down. We had lost it because it hadn't gotten to that cultural level. So the thing that's challenging is even when we know in our hearts it has to be in the culture, we still keep getting it wrong. I hear brilliant people talk about this and acknowledge it, but then they go straight back to their implementation of tools, and they do the thing that's comfortable, the thing that they've learned to do well. So we have to figure out how to act differently in order to make this happen. So let me just take a couple of minutes and just remind us all, because I know we all know what culture is, but it's the sum of all of the learned patterns of behavior that people learn in an organization. So it's the sum of, if this were the organization over here, it's the sum of his and hers and hers and his. When you put all of those things together, the way this group of people have learned to be successful together, to behave, and to the way they work, represents the culture of that organization. This table might have its own culture, which is the sum of each of the individual behaviors, based on what they've learned about how to behave, how to get results in that organization. Cultures exist at many, many levels. At the macro level, cultures exist in civilizations, in regions, in countries. Cultures exist in communities. They certainly exist in organizations. They exist in families. I know that my family has a certain culture. On Sundays we do certain things. On Saturdays we do certain things. My daughter called me on the phone last night, and I knew what she was going to talk about because it's part of our culture in our family that we've developed this way of behaving, a way of acting to get results in our family. But ultimately, culture comes down to individuals. I have a personal culture. Each one of us here have a personal culture. And it's made up of what we've learned in our lives to do. The way we behave personally is our personal culture. I've learned to act in a certain way because I've learned that that way gets the results that I seek to get. Now, I can change my personal culture by changing my thinking about how I need to behave. And of course, ultimately, that's what we have to do in order to improve and have it sustain. I have to change the way I think about things. So let me just share some thoughts about that. Culture is observed individually. It's what we can see individual acts. A lot of people say you can't measure culture. I say baloney. Culture is an easy thing to measure because you can see behavior. When my kids act in a certain way, or my grandchildren now, I see it exactly. I can see my grandchildren because I saw my children, so I know and I think about myself. So I can see what's happening in their lives. I can see what's influencing them, how they're thinking. Okay? Same thing for us in our work. You can see behavior. So you can measure culture, you can see it, you can record it. I always do this because I'm thinking of a video camera. I find myself doing. I used to do this. You can record it, and then you can play it back and you can observe it. You say, wow, look what they were doing. Or look how they talked. Listen how they talked. You can tell the culture of the individuals and the group by making observations. In order to measure culture, however, and by the way, you know you have to measure it, right? Because if you can't measure it, you guys know this better than anybody. If you can't measure it, you can't do what? You can't improve it. But in order to measure it, you have to have something important. You have to have a standard or a scale. If I'm building something at home on my little ranch, I have to have a scale in order to measure so that every board comes out the same, the way I want it to be. In a culture, the only way you can measure what you're observing is to have a standard, a scale. And that, therefore, you can compare what you see with something. The question is, what is the something that you compare it to in order to be able to measure it? Where is my observation of behavior relative to the standard? The standard, I would submit, has to come, the only place a sustainable standard can come from is a principle. We're talking about ideas. You can't use a person as the standard because what happens with people? They change. They come, they go, they change their ideas, they change their behaviors. You can't use a program because programs change. The only thing that you can use to compare and measure culture is a principle, because principles are timeless, they don't change. They're the natural laws that govern outcomes. So, knowing that, how do we develop strong culture? This is my daughter. I always have to throw these things in whenever I get a chance. This is my daughter who lives across the street from me with her 8 children. So these are her 8 children. So if you want to learn about culture, I look to my daughter and I say, so how's she doing that? Because these kids, they come, they're dressed, they're up early in the morning, they all study the piano and flute and cello and guitar, and they're doing well in school, and they're always, dressed nice for church on Sundays. And I think, how does she do this? So when you look at it, when I look at her and her culture that she's developing, and I think about it in the context of my work, it's influenced by a leader, for sure. A leader has a powerful influence on the culture. It's reinforced by rules. Certainly she has rules and discipline in her family. It's embedded by routine. Every morning at 6 o'clock, those kids are up. She has 3 pianos, and they have time that they all start practicing their piano. They have regimen and rules, and it's embedded deeply in their routine. It's validated by recognition with the stars and the charts and all the things she's got on the walls and the doors. The house doesn't look like a house. It looks like it looks like some of the factories that you have, with the walls, the recognition walls, and all the stuff with pictures of kids and all of the good stuff that they're doing. But at the end of the day, when the kids leave home, they'll remember the routine for sure, but there's something else that they have to have in order for them to become the kind of contributing citizens that she wants them to become. And that has to be guided by a set of beliefs. And so, threaded through her role as a mother for these 8 little children, is she's trying to teach them correct beliefs. And the beliefs are ultimately what the kids will take with them when they leave. It's the thing that we have in our work. So when we teach the tools and the practices and implement the systems of lean or operational excellence, we must embed deeply in the way we talk about them the fundamental beliefs that have to go with it. Because we believe this, therefore we do this. We act in a certain way because I understand this fundamental truth. Because I believe that to be the truth, therefore I act in a certain way. And that's what we have to get to in order for lean to become sustained in our organizations. No matter how brilliant your systems, no matter how reinforced they are with rules and recognition, until you change the belief thinking of the people, leaders, managers, and associates in the organization, you're vulnerable to losing the ground that you've gained. At the end of the day, our choices are always guided by our beliefs. And they're influenced by what we've been taught, what we've seen, what we've experienced in our life. You have 5,000 employees in your organization. I guarantee you have 5,000 different points of view. Everybody's experienced different things. Everybody's seen different things happen in their personal lives, and they bring that to them to work. And so we work to try and eliminate variation of our processes, and yet the greatest source of variation comes from all of the individuals who have their own personal cultures that they bring to work, and we try and homogenize that into a common set of practices. They're deeply personal. Our beliefs and our cultures, personal cultures, are very, very personal. So I had an experience a couple of years ago now. I have a son who used to be a bodybuilder. He drove his mother nuts. It was really important to him, and he was all bulked up and all of that stuff. And then he decided, and he had sort of gotten into that culture. And then he decided he wanted to be an Ironman. He wanted to run an Ironman triathlon. And it's a different culture. to be prepared for an Ironman triathlon than it is to be a bodybuilder. And he had to lose about 100 pounds of bulk before he could run and swim and ride his bike. So it was really interesting to watch this kid try and switch himself from one mode to another mode. And he, after 2 years of hard work, all he could do was a half triathlon. He could not do it. And so finally, we had some serious conversations about it. He hired a personal coach who helped him. And until he changed his entire belief systems about what to eat, how to exercise, how to live his life, he could not become competitive as a triathlete. And it was so interesting to watch him do that. And when he made that mental shift and he changed his beliefs about how he should be eating and how he should care for himself, he could not become competitive. So when we went, finally, this is him coming out of the water after swimming 2.5 miles with a jellyfish in Cozumel. And then this is him getting onto his bike. He was so excited because he was confident. He knew he could do it because he had prepared and he had the mental belief system in himself. And then this is him with his mother. So anything less than a complete mental transformation is unsustainable. And that's what we're talking about. We're creating sustainable transformation. Everybody in that group, as we met with these other athletes at this triathlon, he was one of the youngest. And when I tried to figure out why, people said it's because most young people haven't developed the belief system that's required in order to compete at that level. Most Ironman triathletes are 35, 37, 38 years old because they have to develop the culture in order to really be sufficiently disciplined to make it work. So, why do I tell that story? There's a principle that anthropologists call diffusion. When they study cultures of organizations, they find that it's common for people in one culture to observe the practices of another culture. This table really likes the way this group is participating over here. So they watch and they say, so what are they doing? So they say, oh, I like that. Let's do that over here. And then somebody else says, oh, I like what they're doing, so let's try it over here. So pretty soon you have practices that get moved around. But what they don't often do is they don't figure out why this table did it that way. All they saw was the practice. They didn't see the belief that led to it. And unless you understand the belief, it's superficial. It's interesting and it's fun and it gives you a sugar high and it gives you a quick result, which is what often most of us are accountable for. But when the pressure comes and times get hard, we go back to what we believe is the right way to get a result when you have to have it in a certain way, a certain time. So diffusion, when we think about what we've been doing over the last 40 or so years, from generation to generation, we're observing the practices of one organization. At the surface, we're applying them in our organization, but they're not sufficiently rooted to create sustainable beliefs in the reason why we do it. So here's one of my first questions for you is look at your own organizations and the people in your organizations. Look at yourselves, look at your leaders and your managers. Do you understand, do they understand not just the practice, but the deep fundamental belief that's behind it? The belief that led to that practice in the first place. And that's your challenge as leaders, to know the answer to that question and start to change people's belief systems. So another current example that we can think of is the NFL. Of course, they want to change their culture. And so they talk about this culture of violence that's part of the NFL. So when we listened in the news, and almost any newscast that you listen to nowadays, you can hear this. You can see that some of the things that they're trying to do. So the commissioner, not long ago, he said, don't worry, I'm going to send a really clear message. We don't tolerate violence. So he wrote a new policy statement, carefully crafted. This is the policy of the NFL. And then he sent it out. Mailed it to all of the teams and all of the players and all of the staff. Did anything change? No. So here's my question to you, another question. What else might the commissioner do that also won't have an impact? Won't have an impact. Think of all the things that you've done to try and change culture in your organizations. Sending emails. No matter how passionate the leader is, no matter how many times he stands up or she stands up and says it in front of the organization, that's not enough. That doesn't change culture. It takes more than policies and letters and language and PR campaigns and even classes, education. It takes more than projects to change culture. Unless you change thinking fundamentally, it's not sustainable. So, here's a suggestion for you. The Shingle model was developed precisely for that problem, because that's what we saw when we went into organizations. We saw their fundamental inability to sustain the gains that they were making because they had changed the programs and the practices, and they'd adopted them from other places, and that's what we evaluated. But we didn't evaluate their thinking and their belief systems. So when you leave and the pressure for the real world happens, you go back to where you came from most often. So because of that problem we're trying to solve, we came to understand it in a way that we captured in this Shingle model. So let me just very quickly go through that. You can go to shingleinstitute.org. The shingleprize.org still works because they still have a prize. My role now is a funner role. So I got to be involved in the fun part of it and creating it, and now I get to, as an outside affiliate, I get to teach it, which is really fun for me. I really enjoy it a lot. So the way this works is every organization, you see results on the left. We all have results. You guys know that better than almost anybody else in the organization. You've got to create results, no matter what those are. Those might be some environmental thing. It might be some wonderful aspiration. It could be hard financial business results that you got to get, okay? But every organization's got them. And we all develop tools. We all have some kind of a way that we try and actualize those results. How do we make that happen? So we build tools, no big deal. And we build systems to do that. And those things are connected, from results to tools to systems. So everybody's got them. But there's something missing. In most organizations, the culture piece sits in the background. It's a byproduct of our focus on results. So how we choose to go about this relationship between results, tools, and systems creates a de facto culture in the organization. And that's what people see as the way to behave. I have to behave like this in order to be successful in this organization. So therefore, I develop a belief set around my behaviors. And that becomes my personal culture. Roll them up together, and that becomes the de facto culture of the organization. But that's not good enough. Those kinds of cultures are not sustainable, and they don't lead to excellence, long-term sustainable excellence. So, I told you that principles are the only thing that are universal, and they're timeless. Principles are the thing that really ground an organization in truths that don't change over time. So, the principles of operational excellence, or lean, the principles aligned with the systems create not only results but behavior. Systems in your organization not only drive results, but they drive behavior. Unless those systems are aligned with principles, you will get all kinds of deviant behavior. I will get results however I need to get them. But that's not good enough. Those aren't sustainable. You want ideal results. They require ideal behaviors, and those ideal behaviors come from principles. So, this is the thing that makes it unique. This is the thing that we offer to add to you, to what you're already doing. We learned that this piece right here is a dimension that you should lay on top of your existing business systems. Just make the connection. What's the why behind the practices that we're doing? Make sure that they're clear. For accounting, why does the principle of flow impact the way, how does it impact the way in which you account for the costs in the business, the human resources in the business? How does flow impact that? How does it apply? What about seek perfection, the principle of seek perfection? How does the principle, let me just jump to the next slide. How does the principle of seek perfection impact accounting? If you were aligned with that principle and you really believed in it and you understood it for the principle that it is, how might your accounting systems change? How would you think differently about how to present information so people can make quick, easy, fast decisions about how to continuously and be improving? And on and on and on. So we developed, what we did is we searched the records of all of these great organizations, great thought leaders from the 50s and 60s. We could have gone back to the 1800s. In fact, we found some back into the, Plato and Aristotle. They were teaching the same principles, slightly different language, but they were teaching the same things. So from them, we said, we did all of the Paretos and we tried to organize them and we created, affinity diagrams, and all of that led to these 4 categories: cultural enablers, continuous improvement, enterprise excellence, and results, and these 10 guiding principles. So they were intended to represent all of the thought that has gone on that led to all these different programs and practices. These are the core fundamental principles that should be guiding our thinking and our beliefs, and hence our behaviors. So let me just share a couple of ideas in conclusion here. 6 strategies to help you as leaders build a sustainable culture of excellence. First of all, you have to understand the principles. And I can tell you, no matter how long you've been engaged in them, until you actually pull each one of these things apart and look at it and peel back the onions. So why do we respect every individual? That's a principle that came from, we learned that from wherever. I mean, it didn't come from Toyota. That principle has existed from the beginning of time. Why should we do that? And until you can answer that question, why do we really respect? If your answer is so that I get more out of them, or so that I get better productivity, you're not there. Because that's about you and that's about your company. But when you can say, we respect every individual because they have value, because they're human beings, not rocks or factories. They're human beings that have potential to grow, and my stewardship as a leader is to enable and help and support their growth. And guess what? When I do that, they contribute more to my company and my success. But I do it because they're human beings. Why do we lead with humility? Why does a leader lead with humility? The principle is lead with humility. When we behave that way, we get a certain outcome. Why is that true? Because, as Brene Brown says, all growth requires vulnerability. You can't grow unless you're vulnerable. Your organization can't grow. Personally, I can't grow unless I'm willing to become vulnerable. You can do that, and then you say, okay, so if that's true, how should I behave? Oh yeah, the second bullet point. So once I know what the principle is, and I understand the truth behind that, now how should I behave? And it's really important for me to be able to see, if I believe it deeply, therefore I will act in a certain way. Because I believe in people, because I lead with humility, because I seek perfection, because I assure quality at the source, therefore I act in a certain way. We expect in our organization the leaders to behave in a certain way. We expect the managers to behave in a certain way. We expect all of the employees to act in a certain way because we believe in scientific thinking. Because we think systemically. Therefore, we behave in a certain way. The power of a leader to influence is unbelievable. The impact that they can have, and people respond differently. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "What you do speaks so loud that I can't hear what you say." I know we've all heard that many times. It's really true. And so the power of the behaviors of the leader is so impactful. So, secondly, leaders have to be honest with themselves and others. My experience in the last 8 years of working with great leaders in great organizations is it's not easy. We're talking about changing belief systems, about how to deliver great results. If you think that if you have a meeting with your management team and they all nod their heads and say, hi, you know, you're in trouble, because it's got to go deep. And unless it's painful, unless a leader, a person, I can say this best from my own personal experiences. Unless it hurts, until it hurts me, and I feel embarrassed, I feel anxious, I feel vulnerable, until I get to that place, I'm probably not confronting the honest truth about where I am. So, in organizations, in order to change cultures, in order to make this sustainable, we have to be able to be honest with ourselves, which means that a leader has to create an environment where people are willing to tell the truth. If I have a culture where people have learned to behave by holding back the hard stuff, or waiting until later to give bad news, or burying it under the table, then I can't lead in any kind of an effective way, because people won't follow me. Because people know the truth. They know what's going on, and if they don't think that I do as a leader, I'm in trouble. So you've got to create the culture where people say the truth. Let's see what I missed. They have to be able to see. I worked for a wonderful leader, Max Dupree, at Herman Miller for quite a few years. And Max used to say, the first responsibility of a leader is to define reality. And then he always used to say, the last responsibility is to say thank you. And in between defining reality and saying thank you, the leader is a servant. So being able to look in the mirror and see the truth about who we are is part of that reality, the first part of that reality. Leaders are humble. They understand that vulnerability is equal to strength, not weakness. They challenge their own beliefs. They're thinking about, what do I really believe about this? Is it right? Maybe I'm wrong. So they have to be willing to do that. They ask for feedback and they listen carefully when they get it. They avoid blaming other people and they accept accountability. They feel the pain. I've mentioned this already. They get help when they need it. And this is the last one is a little bit interesting. Because leaders are so in such key positions, they have to be a little bit public. You have to kind of say, you have to make your vulnerability public. And that's even harder. So it's a tough deal to be a leader trying to change a culture. Leaders value the potential of every single person. They believe in this untapped potential. They enable, when you understand and you believe deeply in the untapped potential of every single person, it creates opportunities and insights that you wouldn't get any other way. Because I believe in them and I know that they're capable of doing more. It's like what Jim was saying. That Deming said, it's knowledge. When you give people knowledge, all kinds of stuff comes out of them. Show respect. So this is a, I want to put this one in because sometimes people feel like showing respect for people means that you don't deal with hard issues. And that's not really true at all. The most respectful thing to do oftentimes is to confront people on the most difficult issues, performance issues. You gotta say it like it is. You gotta call it, and you gotta do it in a respectful way. That's the thing. You have to be respectful in the way in which we deal with hard, difficult, people-related issues. It doesn't mean you're soft. Can't say that enough. Leaders ensure the systems align with principles. Remember the diamond. You got to make sure that the systems are aligned with principles. So they're driving not only results, but results in a certain way. They drive behaviors so people act in a way that gets ideal results. They act in a way that's congruent with the principles. And by cycling through that circle enough times consciously, they're reinforced, and eventually people start asking harder questions. Well, maybe I'm not right. Maybe this is the right way to do it. Because look what's happening. So that's another thing that leaders do. Leaders balance the scorecard. They finally say, it's not, we've talked about balanced scorecards, but all we've done is balance one side of the equation. We've created a wide breadth of results-oriented metrics. We haven't created a set of behavioral-oriented metrics. So a truly balanced scorecard balances both behavior and results. And you really need both of those things. And I just want to jump to the bottom one. My last point here is that leaders learn to describe results through the lens of the principles. So when you, as financial leaders, often when you get your people together for your quarterly or a monthly all-hands employee meeting, and you go through the results of the business, take the last step of saying, so remember what we've been talking about? We've been talking about flow. And this is all the things that we've been doing that have improved the flow, the principle of flow in this business. Because we did that, therefore, we got these results. And when people see the cause and effect relationship between the principle of lean and the result that you're getting, then they go, oh, I got it. And when you every time a leader stands up to talk about results, they should always connect it with the principle. Because of the principle of seek perfection, there was a group who did this work and they thought it was finished, but then another group picked it up and said, wait a minute, there's another layer to this thing, and they did this. And then another group did this. And before we knew it, we ended up here and not just down here. And it's because we are committed to the principle of seek perfection. We don't know if we'll ever get it. We probably never will, but we never stop trying. The 80-20 rule doesn't exist in this organization. 80-20 rule is a function of your paradigms only. So, sustainable excellent results requires sustainable excellent culture. Culture is changed one person at a time by influencing their beliefs. Sustainable culture is the hardest work that you'll ever do. It is hard work, but it's also the most rewarding work that you'll ever do. It's not about things, it's about people. And it's about people's belief systems. And when you start tapping into those things with people, you create connections with people, and your life will change, I guarantee it. Culture without principles is unsustainable. Remember the principle of diffusion. You got to know why. When you adopt a practice, make sure that you understand the belief that goes behind it, and make that a big part of what you do. And finally, this is a part of a leader's role that cannot be delegated. You cannot ask somebody else to be in charge of the culture. The culture is a consequence of you, the leader. This is your primary responsibility. Leaders lead culture. Leaders lead culture. By every act, by every word, the way each word is said, the way it's pronounced, all of those things that represent the behaviors of the leader, that reflect their beliefs, define and have a powerful influence on the organization. So I really hope that each one of us will be committed to reflect personally, evaluate our own beliefs. I had to put this in. So this is 13 of my 15 grandchildren. I'm reminded that the genes that are inside of those kids all started at least on half of the side of the family anyway, my wife and I. But every one of them are different. The way to influence and teach and build the culture of each of these individuals is one person at a time, one child at a time. We're all unique. We're all powerful. We all have unbelievable, almost infinite potential, and that's the exciting thing about work. Thank you very much. I can take just a couple of questions, and then I'm going to turn the time over.
Just a sec. Let me get a mic to him, please. The room's full, so it may take me a second to get.
I can almost predict what Cliff's going to ask. No, go ahead. I was guessing.
I was privileged to serve on the board of the Shingo Prize and then as chairman during Bob's tenure. The Shingo Institute worked very hard to drive the changes in the models, to think about culture and to think about behaviors. But I'm not sure we ever really knew how to measure them. And I certainly don't think we did a great job in learning how to make those measures visual. Yeah. I would love to have you tell me that I'm overstating the case, or simply give us some examples of how to measure behaviors and make them visual.
Yeah, great question. So we understood the idea before we understood the execution of it, long before. So this is sometimes frustrating for organizations that challenge for the prize, or challenge their organization against the criteria that's the prize. Whether you do it with the intention of being recognized or not is irrelevant. But so little by little, each year, the criteria has morphed. The more clearly we understood the ideal behaviors associated with these principles, the more the criteria has evolved. So now the newest version that will be coming out in the first of the year. So for every one of these 10 guiding principles we took, this was the last thing I did before I retired. We created 4 categories. We call them benchmarks. So we created 4 benchmark categories for all 10 principles and said, this benchmark is sort of a benchmark behavior. If you are focusing on process, you got to see this kind of behavior, and this, and this, and this. So we created those 4 benchmarks, sort of the absolute necessities. And then, but they're high level, so it doesn't become a checklist to say, okay, well, I'm looking for, oh, there's one of those over there, there's one over there. These are high level kind of statements about behavior for each of the 10 guiding principles. And those become the framework around which organizations say, okay, so because that's a true statement, therefore, in the accounting department, we should be doing this. This is what ideal looks like for us on focus on process, or creating constancy of purpose, or creating flowing value for customers. So they're getting more precise about that without being prescriptive, because you don't want to be prescriptive, because that's not the right solution. One more question, then I'll turn it to Bill. Okay, I hope that your minds are spinning. I hope that you're thinking about lots of things that are different kinds of work that you do when you get back to your organizations. Thanks.